Hello there and welcome to another video about Drupal, and I am Matt Petrowski, making videos over at gotdrupal.com, your Drupal addicted instructor, and we're taking a look at using Omega 8's boxes. In this particular video we are talking about using Aegir on Omega 8 and making your own platform. This is a process that I went through to migrate my site, and the previous video in this series talked about the actual sequence of steps that you need to go through when you're going to migrate your live site, or what you're going to do before you migrate your live site, which is basically cloning the site that you have within the exact same platform, then migrating it to your new platform. But what you may want to know is, how do you actually create your own platform? Now, Aegir is simply a Drupal front-end website that uses Drush and other shell scripts on the back end on your box to actually go through a lot of the steps that you would do manually. And using it doesn't use version control necessarily. Well, it can via Drush in order to get modules, etc. But it's going to do all of that for you. So basically what you have to have is patience, and that is when you click a button here, rather than the immediacy within the terminal, you have to actually just wait for the task to run, which really isn't that bad. But I have to admit, being the impatient developer, I do get a little annoyed at having to wait, but it's much nicer to have this all taken care of for you, being able to manage backups, being able to safely migrate sites, especially if you're dealing with multiple sites on the same platform, and then multiple sites on multiple platforms if you're dealing with a bunch of different clients and a bunch of different sites. So what you want to know is, how do you actually create your own platform? Well, there are two parts. There are multiple parts to a platform. And if we go over to my static area on my particular site, I have whatever your site is, your Omega box, you're going to be at data, disk, whatever your username is, and then static. That's where you're going to create your platform. Now, in the very first video in this series, I mentioned that there are two users. The one user that Aegir runs as is the user that you have access to. So if I SSH into my Omega 8 box and I type LL, what we're going to see right here in terms of the permissions is that root has currently set up on backups, clients, static. Root is Omega 8. They are going to have access to that. O1, or whatever your root username is what Aegir is running as, and it's what takes care of updating the permissions, the shell scripts, a lot of the things that are running under what Omega 8 calls Octopus, where everything is ch-rooted or jailed. That's what's going to be running as. Now, what you've been given is an FTP user, which is usually the root user plus your .ftp. That user does not have access to be able to do things to folders controlled by Aegir or by the root user O1. For example, I cannot go in and do a delete of this platform's folder. In fact, when I cd into my static folder, where I am going to create keep my own platforms, what we're going to see is that currently my custom platform, or my platform that was deployed into this folder, GDP 624, the O1 user is what has control over that particular folder, because Aegir took control of it and is also managing the permissions, etc. So the O1.ftp user is what allows me to do things here on the shell, and is also how I access things through the FTP. Now, there's one important thing that I learned about making your own platforms. You can make your own platform and you can create it through the Aegir control panel. The problem is when you create the platform, such as going to the administration and then clicking on the add platform, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be specifying a name of your platform. You'll also have the option to update or change the path, and then you'll also be able to use a makefile. And the makefile is what you're going to need to create at the bare minimum in order to get all of the different parts that constitutes your particular platform. So if I was to type in a Drupal platform, a new one, let's say it's based on 625, and this would be an update, you can see that it's creating the path for me. at data disk 01 static. So automatically Omega 8 is going to put this in your static folder, and you can change this. I changed my previous one from gotdrupal-624 to GDP624. Clicking that link right there allows me to simply change this. So it would be something like, for me, GDP625. So that's how I would know the difference using that shorthand version. Now, the make file that I'm going to specify needs to be, as it mentions, an absolute path on the file system or a public URL. Now, this can be a URL to your GitHub. It can be a URL on the system, wherever you want it to be. In my particular case, what the first thing that I ever did was, I'll do a pwd right here. So I can copy this path. I put mine in this file right here, gotdrupal.make.txt. That was just something that I was testing with. So there's that, and then here is what I would specify. So this is how you start to set up a platform. And I'm going to walk through a make file, and at least the basics of it, in order to generate a new platform. Now what happens is you need to know that as it mentions within the notes here, that this directory cannot already exist, meaning GDP 625 should not exist in order for this make file to be used. And that's because the Aegir instance, the user running as on my box 01, or whatever your username is, that means Aegir is going to create this platform. But here's the big snafu that I came across. A very big one. In fact, took me 3 hours. One of those problems that you really slap your head and you're frustrated because you don't know why it worked that way. The reason for that is because when you create a new platform, that new platform, if created through the Aegir control panel, will create a profile that includes the default profile. If you have a website that is currently set to the default profile, which in my case the GotDrupal website was, then that is the profile that will be used by the mere fact that the default folder exists. So in other words, if we went into if we go into my actual site, cd-gdp, my platform, excuse me, this profiles folder, if we take a look at it, if we cd into profiles, and we look at this, you can see that the only profile that exists is GotDrupal. And that's exactly what I want. I don't want the default profile to exist because the gotdrupal.com website was initially created to specify and use the default profile. So I need to get rid of that. So the only way to create and control things here on the box is to not have it generated through the actual Aegir instance, because Aegir is running as your O1 or your root user, not your .ftp user, and that is the problem. So you actually have to go in and create the profile using the drush command. If we look at drush and simply type it, then one of the commands that you have is the drush make generate or make test. One of them is to create. Let's see, we can also type in help on the command line, and you maybe get it. Yeah, I think it's drush make. So let's type in drush again and look at drush make right there. Turns a make file into a working Drupal install. There you go. So what you're going to have to do, and you can type in drush help make in order to get more information about using the actual make command, but it's going to basically need you're going to do drush make, what is the make file, and then what is the actual directory that you're going to create. The reason that you need to use drush in order to create the custom profile is the fact that you're then able to go into this folder, into the profiles, and delete the default profile so that it's not accidentally used by your site if your site started with the default profile and you're able to move the site to that profile. This is all very important learning stuff, and hopefully you're getting that out of this video. From that point forward, you can simply go in, and since the platform will have been created on the command line, you go in, you delete the default profile, you can then go in and actually create the platform, and you can do it without referencing the actual makefile. Because the path will already exist, you can reference the makefile if you want, but it won't be used because the path already exists, so that when you create the platform after you've generated the actual site on the command line, then you won't get any issues. This will actually create your platform. You can then do all of the tasks such as verify, etc. So what you need to know is what constitutes a makefile and how does that actually work? Well, let's take a look at that. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the actual makefile and eventually a profile as well and how that sets up. Now the profiles were created, I think, back in Drupal 5, but they really evolved in Drupal 6 and now in Drupal 7. I don't know what their status is, whether they've evolved that much more. But basically, Drush, being the command line shell tool for Drupal, allows you to use a makefile, which is a list of instructions of where to get things in order to compose and build a Drupal platform, or what's called a Drupal distribution. And we're going to be making our own. Now, using my FTP editor, or my FTP tool, what's really nice is you can put the makefile directly on your Omega 8 box, or as I mentioned, it can be on your GitHub hosted version control or anywhere that's publicly accessible. Now what I like about this tool is I can simply double click here and it gives me my nice convenient happy editor TextMate. Now what this file is this is what's called a stub file, and a stub file simply references other files that are somewhere on the internet publicly accessible that gives you all of the different information about what's going to compose a particular platform. Now one of the helpful things that Grace over at Omega 8 told me was you can look at other distributions in order to see how to compose, or some of the different options that you have available to you in other platforms. In fact, many of the platforms that they list in the actual site. So if you go over to platforms, and if you go over, let's say, down to Videola, and let's take a look at their platform. They aren't going to have a makefile listed here, but if you go to drupal.org/project/Videola, or NodeStream. If it's not there, bummer. Let's put in NodeStream, because I know that there's one there. We can actually go download via version control any of the versions, and it would be the 6.1 in this particular case, or 7, or whatever you're going to use. You can actually pull this down. In fact, I believe Videola is on Lullabot's site. So essentially, you can use one of these other distributions as an example for your own, and I did exactly that. I used both NodeStream and Videola in order to find out what are the different bits and pieces that I can pull from in order to make my own. So heading back over to my main file and mentioning that this is a stub file, this file is simply pointing to what is the API of Drush Make, what is the core of Drupal. It's a 6.x core that I'm currently doing, using the latest press flow from Aegir. Now in this particular case, I'm pulling the core directly from a tar gzip file, and the download type, as you can see, can be Git, it can be pulled from an HTTP, it can be pulled from all kinds of different places. You can see that when it is a version controlled system, you can use a branch, but in this case I don't believe the branch is actually applying in this case, because it's simply using a GET HTTP request and simply pulling this tar file, which happens to be a patched version of PressFlow for 6.2.4 coming directly from the Aegir group. So they apply their own patches for use within Aegir, and that's something that I was given by Grace through chat This is something that I might not have known about, but something that you may need to research. Whatever the latest press flow is, at least on versions of 6, you may need to pull that from a location where you search the Omega 8 website or you look at some of their docs. Now, the stub aspect of this, because this is the core of Drupal that I want to use, and it's press flow instead of just a vanilla Drupal. But the project, which is my profile, you can see right here, which is aptly named Got Drupal, is going to use Git, and it's going to pull it directly from my particular GitHub. So if you go look at my GitHub, if we switch over and then go to the GitHub/Petrowski, and that loads, and then we look at my Got Drupal, this is where I have my site profile and my make file, which includes all of my instructions. So the make file that's actually on the Omega 8 box is a stub file that simply points to another make file, which you can include in order to, that includes all of the instructions. So if we were to take a look at this, this is the make file that actually has a list of all of the different things that you need to include. Now, what's important to know is that you can include, any module that you want, but there are some modules that you need to omit purposefully because Omega 8 automatically adds them onto their boxes. They're part of their performance package. They're things that they automatically include. So up here up at the top, you can see that again we have the API of the Drush version. We have the core, which is Drupal core 6. I have listing of contrib modules. I'm using admin menu, but rather than using a public release, I want to explicitly download a development release, which is specifying the branch, and it's accessing it through Git, and it's getting it off of Drupal.org's Git repository for admin menu, and I'm using 6.x.3. The rest of the modules in my particular platform, you can see right here, is referencing the module name, and then the variable, or the variable that I'm passing it within this particular array is the version number that I want to use. And this is just the simplified version. I'll leave it up to you to actually go through all of the different options by looking at the Drush make example file over at Drush make. So if we look at the project, and we look at Drush make, this is where you're going to be able to access, as you scroll down right here, the example.make file right there. If you need more information, this has all of the different options of what Drush will use and what Aegir will use when it uses that make file, or what you will use when you create it on the command line. So these are all of the modules that I got. Here is my own custom module, but in this particular case, I have this all commented out. The reason for this is when you actually reference your particular platform referenced by your stub file, by the fact that I'm referencing this GitHub repository, the repository itself includes the modules and themes folder that comes as part of the actual distribution. So in this case, my own custom module called RSS enclosure, which you're welcome to take a look at that code, simply just changes the way that the RSS feed includes a video. I have that file I had a file, and this is actually just referencing a way that you can reference a specific local file on your Omega 8 box. But remember, I have this commented out because I didn't need to pull it that way anymore. I just left it in here for my own reference. I'm including the code on the Git repository. So if we were to jump up and we would look at my modules folder, you can see that RSS enclosure is right there. And if I jump up one more, you can also see that within themes, I have my own modified version of a theme. So I'm managing that via version control, and updates to that will allow me to pull that down. Now what you need to know is that the modules that are pulled when a profile is created, when the platform is generated, whether on the command line or via the Aegir control panel, that only happens that first time. You would then need to update those modules manually, and you would do that as part of your site migration process. So looking at that makefile again, it's basically just a list of instructions. It's going to be able to grab libraries. In my particular case, because I'm working with a Drupal 6 setup for the profile, I'm using the profiler module, which comes down as a library, which allows you to then pull things out and use. In particular, if we were to take a look at, it's on the repository. We just need to go up one level. The .info file. So a .info file, this is part of Profiler, and Videola uses it, and I don't know if NodeStream does, but basically it allows you to specify simply these dependencies of modules that need to be active and turned on your website. If those modules aren't available when Make downloads them, then Aegir will actually fault and will say that the site couldn't be built. Also, here's a little tip about how the profile is actually switched. The old _short _name equals default means that it's going to, and because default does not exist within your platform, because you created it as your FTP user in the terminal and you deleted it, means that it will switch to the platform that you want to be used, the first one that it finds, which is the only one, which is your new platform. And that's how you get it to switch. That's important because Aegir automatically generates the settings.php file in the root of the platform, and that settings hard codes the platform that's used, or the profile that's used for any new site generated for that particular platform. So I don't know if there's much more to talk about the makefile, other than you've got custom modules, you've got themes that are included. Oh, the Omega default modules. So basically, here's what you need to know. I've already said do not uncomment these. You can take all of this code from my particular profile, my particular makefile if you want. But as of the creation of my Drupal platform, here is a list, or the URL for the list of all of the different modules. That's at omega8.cc, extra modules available in all platforms -123. And there's also, you can look at on Drupal code, their actual site, or it may be on Drupal's Git repository. But here they are: backup, migrate, block cache, boost, cache, config perms, CSS, DB tuner, expires, FPA. You can go through the list yourself. And basically, these are the modules that you don't want to include in your list of contrib modules. And this is the process that you go through for updating your site as well. So in order for me to update my site, once I've migrated the Drupal to my new platform, if a new version of Drupal is released or new modules with security releases are released, I'm simply going to update this particular file and build a new platform. Now, I of course can create different branches and different tags within my version controlled repository and advance them forward and start to reference those branches and tags, allowing me to create the same platform with different references to different modules. I mean, obviously, updating the module is simply just a matter of changing the version number to the new security update within this particular version controlled file, and then building a new platform in it, which I already explained in the previous video, so that on my site, let's see if I'm still logged in. There I am. Let's actually go up one more level. So that what would happen is here within my static, where I currently have a GDP 624, if it was a core update, I would then have a GDP 625, and maybe it includes some updates to modules as well. And I would go through the whole process that I discussed in the previous video in this series, which is clone your site on the same platform, then migrate it to the new platform, and test out and make sure everything works just fine. So that's what we have with regards to using the Drush Make. There's all kinds of other little details, but hopefully I've given you all the different things that you need to know about snafus and things that you might come across, saving you the 3 to 4 hours of head scratching that I came across myself, or maybe even more if you're not as fluent when using Aegir and Drush on Omega 8 boxes. All right, until the next video, thanks a lot.